Let's move on to Moto2. It was once again Raul Fernandez who held off teammate Remy Gardner for back-to-back wins and a Team 1-2 for the IO pair. Fernandez really showing that the pains he's still experiencing from his injury are not holding him back, with a broken bone in his hand giving him no bother at all, apparently. It was, though, Sam Lowes who started on pole, but after a mistake cost him the lead, he was still able to keep it on the road and brought it home in fourth place. Aaron Cadet overhauled him for the final spot on the podium. Jake Dixon's returned to Moto2 as well after deputising in MotoGP. He came home in 19th position. It's still Remy Gardner with a 34-point lead now in the standings. Keith, with a broken bone in your hand and still to win 2 races on the trot, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, he got himself sorted out fairly early on, didn't he? I think that Remy was closing him down massively towards the end. And then Remy had that, again, Huewen sorts of men from the boys, got it nice and sideways through there. I'll tell you what, 145, 150 mile an hour, massively sideways. And, I think he was aiming to try and make the pass if he could have done to the end of that lap. But Sam Lowes, good start from Sam. Good start literally from the line as well. He's got his launches sorted now, Sam. So got himself into the lead. But as the fuel level seemed to go down, he seemed to struggle just a little bit with that transition period that you're going through when the tyre grip is starting to go away from you and your fuel levels change. Balance of the bike, it took him 2 or 3 laps to get back into it a little bit. And fourth place was as best he could do with that, it would seem. But Remy Gardner, Raul Fernandez, ignoring that hand injury completely. Didn't even look like it was giving him any trouble. Dead smooth. Not an easy track either, I would have said, with a hand injury like that. It would have been, you would have thought it would have been smarting fairly well. But Remy, again, okay, he's lost 5 points, but he looks dead cool. I mean, I've got to say, Remy had a lot of work to do after that first couple of laps and worked his way through nice and neatly. And you've got to really make sure you don't end up in... The trouble is with this time of the year, if someone's not in the hunt for the title, they're prepared to push a little bit harder than the guys that are in the hunt for the title. And, Remy's got that horrible balancing act to play. If you don't get a great start, if you're not among the people that are similarly encumbered by the fact they're going for a championship, somebody's likely to ram it up the inside of you without any care whatsoever, because they're not got to worry about that particular situation where he's got to be doubly careful, because throwing it away and losing the 20 points he ended up on would basically close his championship lead right down with 4 more rounds to go. It ain't done and dusted yet, but if he holds his head like I'm sure he looks like, well, he looks to me like he can easily keep it together. But I mean, now he's had how many wins? Has he had 4 wins and Rail's had 6, I think, in my mind. I seem to remember something like that. But there's certainly Fernandez is on a roll at the moment.
And interesting, of course, of these 4 rounds that are left, 2 of them are repeats, if you like, aren't they? It's Portugal again and Misano again, both tracks where Fernandez has won this year. So, Fernandez is doing all he can. He's keeping the pressure on Remy by winning races. Remy at the moment is matching all of that pressure. And I think the next couple of rounds are going to be they're going to say which way this title fight is going to go. Is it going to go down to the wire? Or, is Remy just going to hold firm, and maybe Fernandez is going to realize, well, even if I'm winning every week because of this points lead, if Remy's going to be there, it's not going to be enough. On the other hand, one mistake from Remy and it all changes. I mean, a 34-point lead, but in an ideal world, no rider wants to go to the final round with the title to be decided, do they, Keith? Because anything can happen, let alone the weather at this, at the end of November in Valencia. But So really, if you look at it that way, he's only got an 8-point lead with 3 rounds to go. If you look at it that way of trying to wrap it up 1 race early. So, what does Remy do? Does he push for the wins, or does he just keep going with the podiums? It's going to be interesting to see who blinks first, I think, in the next couple of rounds.
I love statistics, There's 100 points left on the table and he's got a 34-point lead. That seems to me, pretty substantial with 4 rounds left. I'd rather be in his position than in Fernandez's position.
Well, this is Moto2, and anything can happen, can't it? It is a 34-point lead.
Just one more thing to add on that, a bit of breaking news tonight, actually, that both of them will be on MotoGP bikes on Wednesday. So that's
a fact. Yeah,
that sort of just came out, didn't it, on Sunday? And so that'll be interesting that they get an early debut, a head start on the other rookies, I guess.
It's a good point to make, because particularly when they're both going for a championship, you make a mistake on a MotoGP bike on testing in Misano, and cause yourself a bit of injury while you're at a test. Okay, they might get a head start on what's going on in 2022, but they haven't finished 2021 yet.
Fernandez has a hand injury already, doesn't he? He doesn't want to aggravate that, but yeah.
Well, we'll certainly have to wait and see how they get on, don't we? 34 point is the lead for Remy Gardner with 271, ahead of Ralph Fernandez, 237. Marco Bezzecchi, 190 in third. Then Sam Lowes, 140, and Aaron Canet has 119 points. Right, Moto3 now. It was another rider with a back-to-back victory this weekend, as Deniz Oncu followed up his win from last weekend with another one in Misano for the Moto3 rider after Fenati fell away from the lead. Foggia did have to fight for it because pole sitter Romano Fenati did look relatively at ease out in front in the opening stages of the race with nearly a 3-second lead, I think it was, until he slid off from the track on lap 14. With that, Foggia now sneaks into second place in the championship, still behind leader Acosta, who picked up points in 7th. Antonelli came home 2nd with Amigno rounding out the podium. However, Moto3 wasn't without its controversy as usual this week, with many riders having big crashes on Saturday, all being declared fit, bringing up a huge debate once again around concussion checks, with the biggest of the crashes actually caused by Yuki Kuni riding slowly on the racing line, which caused Sura to crash, and that did result in Kuni being disqualified, not allowed to start the race. Moto3 once again providing all the action on track and off it, and it really does bring up this discussion across the classes, Keith, doesn't it, of what do we do about this concussion issue? We've had lots of questions coming in as well. This issue needs looking at. All the sports learn more, know more about it than we do in terms of how they actually judge this.
Right, Yuki Kuni. First thing, he should have got disqualified. We need to see more of that to start with. As soon as you start disqualifying riders and it's costing teams to get riders to tracks and they're not getting into the races, teams will soon bring the boot out regarding that, and we'll sort out all this bloody dawdling around on racing line business. We need to see more of it from that point of view. I mean, it caused the kid, some fair injury as well, which is, Sura has taken a fair clattering. So good for Yuki Kuni. Sorry, mate, but you shouldn't be dawdling around on a racing line. So that's that out of the way. Concussion, one of my favourite rants, Harry, as you're about to find out.
Best to last.
It's just not right. I mean, we are in a professional global sport. Motorsport is dangerous. Says it on the back of the ticket, used to be the old cliched phrase, didn't it? And the fact is, it is. And something like a head injury, which really the world has only just caught up on in the last, we'll say, decade, shall we, for giving it a bit of reason. It's taken almost the last decade for sports like football, rugby, boxing, all these ones that are contact sports, to realise that a head injury is something that's cumulative. One bang on the head, you might get away with. Secondary bang on the head, you might not get away with. And the levels as to which that concussion can come are not really legislated for, particularly in MotoGP and the support classes. The fact is that you don't have to be knocked out to have a concussion. You can get a mild concussion with any kind of contact. After this afternoon's racing, I went through the rule book and looked at the protocols that both IRTA, stewards, Dorna, the FIM all work to. It's a massively difficult area to nail down in one, but a particular phrase that I wrote down on purpose. This is actually a consensus that's actually legislated for within the FIM MotoGP rulebook. It's a statement on concussion in sport at the 5th International Conference held in Berlin in October 2016. This is an actual referenced conference in our rulebook. But the paragraph that caught my eye, SRC, which is a sport-related concussion, is considered to be among the most complex injuries in sports medicine to diagnose, assess, and manage. The majority of SRCs occur without loss of consciousness or frank neurological signs. At present, there is no perfect diagnostic test or marker that clinicians can rely on for an immediate diagnosis of SRC in the sporting environment. So in other words, it's virtually impossible to diagnose, even if you're a clinician, even if you're an expert, it's virtually impossible to diagnose accurately the extent of your head injury. How frightening is that paragraph? And that paragraph is one that you're led to through the rule book. I mean, I've like I say, I've printed all this lot. I've actually done some bloody work for this lot this afternoon for the Crash.net MotoGP, medical fitness to race. In the event of a suspected concussion, the rider should be assessed and managed in accordance with the guidelines for the assessment and management of concussion as contained within the consensus statement on concussion in sport, which is the one I've just read a paragraph out from. Bearing in mind, there's a bloody book on this. Then you got the SCAT 5. Everyone will be going, what about the SCAT 5? What about the SCAT 5? Well, I've got it here. And all it is a tick box thing that you go through. And I'm sure that our clinician at trackside will go through the tick box. Can you touch the end of your nose? Can you lift one leg? It's all here. You can do all of that stuff. Anyway, having been absolutely massively negative towards the way that we handle our concussion, which I think we handle it very badly, there are other sports that we should take some kind of lead from. There are units of measurement that you can take. You can have in your helmet. You can have a deceleration monitor in there. If it reaches to a certain point, that's it. You're done. BSB, British Superbikes. I spoke with Stuart Higgs, race director for MSVR, earlier on today because I needed to just get up to speed on if they're still handling it in the same way. Because Stuart, there's nothing quite like a dictator in sport. If you've got a dictator in sport, you can make the rules work. If you think it's right, then plow on ahead. And I love Stuart for the way that he makes rules in BSB. I think that they are very strong rules and for the right reasons. And particularly in head injury, if you've had a concussion or if you've got a suspected concussion, you are out of that sport for 8 days. And 8 days for a reason, because it takes you past the following weekend as well. So if you've got back-to-back weekends, you're not racing in the next weekend either. Because concussion can, and again, I've read all this in these 3 hours of prep I've been doing, concussion could show symptoms in the next minute or in the next hour or in the next day. You can't be sure that concussion is going to be something that shows up in forms that we are familiar with or have been led to believe these are the forms of concussion. It can happen. And then it's cumulative, which is another thing that worries me as well, is the fact is, I've been knocked out in both in road racing and motocross. Motocross because I'm stupid, road racing just because I ended up in a big accident. But the point being, I've been knocked out and I've been concerned about my memory. Is it my age? Is it not my age? Is it something that I've got cumulative because of what I've had in my sporting life prior? And there are a lot of people that are asking the same questions in football, in rugby, people that have had these massive collisions throughout their sporting life. Should youngsters head a ball? There's a consensus at the moment. The youngsters that are in football, my girls all do local ladies league football. Heading a ball is still normal, but they're actually talking about restricting at what age you can start practicing headers in school because of that effect it has on your brain. I think my conclusion is that we're not doing enough regarding concussion. I don't believe that we should leave it up to a rider or even a clinician at trackside to make that diagnosis. If there is a suspicion that someone has been unconscious or not quite with us straight after a race, and Deniz Oncu, who's the man that's really got us into this rant, who was allowed to race today, despite the fact clearly he was stricken at the time, and it was a massive crash. Those kind of whiplash crashes where you bang your head on the floor from behind and the like, they're the worst crashes. I go back to where this all started for me, where the rant started. It was 2018 when Danilo Petrucci, coming out of pit lane at Aragon, was wiped by, I think it was by Pol Espargaro, I think, back in the day. And when we spoke to Danilo later in the day, he couldn't even remember what day of the week it was. And somehow he was still allowed to ride in the afternoon sessions. And I think that's wrong and irresponsible. And I think that as a top-line sport, a global top-line sport, we should be more proactive. There should be something like the track limits bloody monitor. We should have something like that in a helmet, as part of your helmet. They're tiny. And if you have gone past that impact, that G-force, that whatever the level that we set it as a sport at, once you've hit that point, once your head has decelerated, at that rate, at that measured rate, you're out of there. That's it. It's no good shining a light in your eyes, no good making somebody touch your nose. I could touch my nose with a barge pole. You can see it from here. But the point being is that these kind of tests, they might be quick, ready reckoners, but I think we're beyond that. I think head injuries and the diagnoses and the possibilities of how later life you can suffer from something like this, we need to be more proactive and act now. We're already behind the game, in my view. Was it NASCAR, Harry? I mean, I think it's NASCAR, again, going four wheels, that have got a G-force monitor or something like that, because I think that when they crash into a wall on these ovals at 200 mile an hour, it's something like 300 G for a millisecond that they pull. I think they pull this massive G-force. And I think what they do is they've got a monitor that shows up. And if they've had that, hello, is that your dog? Is that your dog?
It's not my dog.
Not mine.
Pete,
not
is
mine.
it your dog? Go on, let him in.
He's loving your rant, Keith.
Because in my rant, he's saying, shut up.
He's agreeing with you.
It's interesting,
Has that dog got an edge injury?
He will have if he carries on.
It's interesting, though, isn't it? That, I mean, just coming on the most recent four-wheel thing that I saw, I think it was Carlos Sainz Jr. in the Ferrari had a really big incident in Monza qualifying, and usually at Formula One, the hands device does its trick of protecting the driver's head from sort of being moved the route too far. But on the replays, that didn't do its job properly, and he came, hit the front of his head, nearly hit the front of the halo, which is in front of the steering wheel, which should never happen. But immediately, the FIM Formula One are straight on it and investigating it and doing their due diligence. I don't know what then happens from behind the scenes, but also I think it's interesting to see how in MotoGP you can't really also take a rider's word for it, are they? Because they're never going to admit. They're never going to admit, are they?
No. I mean, that's never going to be the case. I think in Formula One as well, that, obviously the car, you can measure the G-forces through the car. It's a different thing. You're strapped in it, so you know what the car stopped at. With a bike, you don't. You're always a part of the, you're away from the bike. So measuring G-force accurately, we've got the systems in the Alpine Stars air suit, for instance. That works on algorithms. As soon as it's very, very clever. So it knows when you're about to hit the floor. It knows when you're going at a certain speed and you're in an awkward position, and pop, up comes the airbag. If we've got stuff that works in technically in that manner, it is not a million miles away from one extra little lightweight piece of equipment to measure the G-force that your head has gone through. And personally, I am amazed that we don't have that equipment yet. Why that is not mandatory, I have no clue, because it's only going to benefit everybody. It's almost pardon me, but a no-brainer. It's one of them ones where, what's to stop it? We're a rich sport. It's not expensive for these kind of monitoring devices. It takes away all the variables, all the possibilities of getting it wrong. And for the future, for that rider's future as well. We don't need a bunch of, riders that have got head injuries late into life, dementia and stuff like that. We're all linking things up with head injuries previously with dementia. It might not be anything. It can be vascular dementia. It can be a disease dementia. It can be all sorts of things. But your head is a fairly complex piece of equipment, more complex than anything else that we're likely to work on or realize. So I don't understand why we don't have a very simple system. Once you have reached a certain point, measured without, just like it is with riding on the green paint, that seems to be really important at the moment. How about having something that's equally as important, to me anyway, to save our youngsters from possibilities of later life problems, if not immediate problems. Again, I refer to the cars. I mean, look at poor old Schumi. I mean, at the end of the day, he's out skiing with his family, clunks his head on a rock, and that's a head injury too far for him. It is your brain is too gentle a piece of an organ to really mess around with. I suppose the thing that stuns me as well is, my rant is not one that's been in isolation just for you guys and the poor sods that are listening to it at home at the moment. It's one that I've had in the paddock with some fairly high up people that run our sport. And it's been fairly dismissed, I must say, which surprises me and disappoints me. Not just because I said it and I think I'm right, but it is surprising that people high in our sport that are very, very clever people that work out problems and solve problems massively well. And yet this one, which affects all of us to an extent, isn't being dealt with, to my knowledge. Or did I just forget that?
I found it quite disturbing reading something earlier. I think that Jack Miller came out with saying, if the reason we don't, Dorna and MotoGP aren't providing perhaps as much as they could do to monitor this is because there would simply, if we had all that statistics, and there would be no MotoGP because there would be a huge amount. There was any kind of incident, you'd lose riders left, right, and centre, and there simply wouldn't be a consistent championship. And I found that a bit disturbing.
Well, I understand where he's coming from. Of course, it depends on the level at which these things are set. Once you go into automation and stuff like that, and you take the responsibility away from an individual, there is no doubt about it. Some people, and probably Jack's one of them, you could bang him on the head at the same amount you could bang me on the head. I'd get knocked out, and he'd say, "Want another beer, mate?" Yeah. It kind of, some people appear to be okay, and I think that is the point. Appearing to be okay doesn't mean you are, and therein lies the crux of the matter, isn't it? I mean, some people can take a whack on the head, go a bit doolally for a second or two, and then they're fine. But others are knocked out stone cold with the same kind of impact. But whatever it is, we are, smoking. There are some people that can smoke 40 fags a day and live till 90. There are others that cop something horrible early on with less cigarettes. I mean, where is the limit? Where you have to take a responsible view on it. And you said it earlier on, a rider will ride. If he was one-armed, he'd still ride. In fact, Passini, I suppose we could include him on it. He's moved all his controls over to the other side, and Passini is still a virtual race winner. So riders will adapt to anything, whatever the circumstances are. But I think as a body, we need to be a little bit more proactive with this. Maybe you set the limits at, I don't know what the limits are. I don't know how other sports are doing it, but it's happening in other sports and they're still continuing. Yeah. The contact sports like rugby, I mean, they're crashing into each other like raging bulls. I mean, there are other sports that measure things in a different way. I mean, I don't know. Are there any other sports that are measuring it through helmets and stuff like that? Do NASCAR, is that a compulsory thing, I wonder?
I mean, I don't know. Actually,
I think we need to throw it. I think we need to throw it out there, don't we? Yeah. We need to throw it out to people. What do you think at home? What do you think is right in the circumstances? I mean, we've got green paint monitors. Is a helmet monitor for a possible head injury a good idea or not? Is Jack right? Is Jack right in as much as saying that if we had these monitors, we'd hardly have any MotoGP racing? I don't think he is right, to be honest. There are not too many people that bang their heads that hard during the course of a year. I think what I'm looking at is the extremes of Deniz Oncu, who we've just had, that did clearly take a massive head injury. I'm going to call it a head injury, even though it appears that he didn't take a head injury. But anybody who gets to the medical centre and then can't remember what's happened, but still rides the next day, can't be right. Yeah. Can it? Again, what do you think at home? What do you think at home?
Yeah, let us know in the comments section and on Twitter. It'd be great to get your thoughts in on that, because it is a huge debate and that will rage on, I think. And I think we just need more communication and clearer answers to these kind of things. I'm very wary of the time here, and I feel like it was important to give that a good rant, Keith. But let's just see off the Moto3 race action, actually, if we can just sort of round that off, because Pedro Acosta is still in the lead, 42 points lead now, 210. Dennis Foggia and Sergio Garcia tied on 168 points. Foggia is second, I think, on countback. But Pete, so I mean, certainly the fight for second is certainly getting intense there. But Acosta with a solid points finish on the board as well, keeping it on the road this time.
Yeah, and keeping it on the road, you've got to spare a thought for Romano Fenati, haven't you? Falling out like that, I mean, you could see how devastated he was. He looked like he had, a home win. He'd done the hard work, and he almost by breaking away. But yeah, these things seem to happen in Brazil. We saw it with Bagnaia last year. He fell from the lead as well. I don't know whether it's very close to the coast. You've got the dust, the sand, the weather changes. Does it?
From trackside, Pete, funny enough, I was talking to somebody earlier on today, and they said that the rain seems to bring in lots of like dust and dirt. Not only does it wash the rubber out of the track, which is something that we're all familiar with, but it seems to bring this film. All the hire cars parked in the car park are like covered in a film of like dust and sand when it's been raining. So I think that you've just hit the nail on the head there. When we get a bit of rain, it brings in a bit more than what we might have expected at track.
A bit like Qatar, I guess. Maybe they have that sort of strange dust sometimes, don't they, there as well? Fenati, unfortunately, that's his championship hopes over, really, isn't it? But as you say, Foggia, the man on form and up to second now, and Acosta, as we said last week, after that sort of that rookie race, if you like, in Aragon, that he needed to kind of just restore order. Well, he salvaged some good points on the last lap, but a lot of the time he just didn't seem to have the pace, did he? And I think that Foggia and those other guys, Garcia's had obviously the bad luck in it, falling in Aragon on the last lap when he had the chance to take a really big chunk out of Acosta's lead. The momentum seems to have slipped away from him a bit. It's now gone to Foggia, but it's going to be interesting, as you say, big lead now, 42 points. But if it carries on like this, because the thing is, in Moto3, Moto2, and even MotoGP nowadays, you can't just say, oh, well, if you just finish second to the guy that's chasing you, you'll be fine, because it doesn't work that way, as we saw today with Acosta. You're not going to finish second. You'll be lucky to finish on the podium, and that's why points leads can suddenly disappear when the racing is that close. So, interesting to see what will happen in COTA.
Well, I think you're right. COTA is going to be a tricky one, because from memory, has Acosta actually been there before? He hasn't, has he?
No, as a rookie, they wouldn't have gone.
And it's a very difficult racetrack, so he's got a lot to learn on a difficult racetrack. Next time round, he's not been on the podium in the last 4 races. Foggia has been on the podium 4 races on the trot, so the momentum is definitely in the way of the young Italian. So at the end of the day, it's looking like Acosta's really got to pick the pace up here a little bit. You talk about Quartararo, 34 points being the situation there between him and Bagnaia. Well, 48 is a little bit more in hand, but I would say that in the circumstances, there's more likely to be a mistake in a Moto3 race from a rookie at somewhere like Texas, where he could drop 25 points just like that, and then all of a sudden it's game on.
Game on, indeed. Game on, indeed. Just behind Foggia and Garcia is Fenati with 134, as you say, does look a little bit out of the hunt now, and Masia 122 behind him. Right, there is time, I think, to chuck some listener questions at you, because we've had a lot come in. So first one from Joe Nichols. MotoGP 1, 2, 3, 4 was Ducati, Yamaha, Ducati, Honda. World Superbike Race 2 1, 2, 3, 4 Ducati, Yamaha, Ducati, Honda. British Superbikes looks like it'll be a Yamaha year as well. Question is, in your opinion, which manufacturer is having the best year, and what do the others need to do to catch up? And that's from Joe.
I think if I knew that, I'd be working for one of them. I think Ducati are having a great year. I think they've finally got themselves sorted out with the team seems to have a dynamic about it that's working very well for them. Yamaha, in BSB, even when they wipe each other out, they still come back with race wins, don't they? The O show, Halloran and McKenzie, brilliant stuff from both of them. They're really putting on a show. Is their bike any better than everybody else's? I'm not so sure about that. I think the team is working particularly well, and the riders are working particularly well in it. World Superbike, Jonathan Rea, even when he's having a bad day, he's still there or thereabouts on a Kawasaki that's been fairly well penalised in the way that its revs have been moderated, shall we say. Ducati are having a reasonable time. Yamaha, top rack. The thing for me is, and it's difficult from a legislation point of view, particularly in World Superbikes, legislating against a rider's performance is the thing that's difficult. If you're legislating against the bike, how do you do that? Top Rack is riding that Yamaha out of its socks. He's making a real job. Razgatlioglu is just doing the business on the Yamaha. Scott Redding looked good this weekend on the Ducati as well. Rinaldi, okay, he's had a good ride as well. Track to track, I think World Superbike have got it pretty much right in their regulations. Scott Smart, son of Paul and Maggie Smart, nephew of Barry Sheen, is a very, very clever technical director, very clever man indeed. And he monitors this stuff like it's his baby. And he has the control through, obviously, Dorna and the World Superbike authorities to make those changes. Very difficult job as well. It's a good job it's Scott, because he doesn't mind taking a thump on the nose from people when they get slightly insulting and saying that as soon as the Kawasaki gets beat, then everyone on the Kawasaki side is turning around and saying, "You took 500 revs off us, we want them back." And then you got the Ducati when they get beat, they're complaining that the Kawasaki's going too fast in the straight, whatever it is. But Smarty's got the job of trying to balance that up. Phew, I wouldn't want his job, that is for sure. I'm glad he's a better man than me, that is for sure, when it comes to that. But I think the Superbike regs are pretty clever. In answer to the question, what have they got to do to get... It's that age-old thing. Every single racetrack you go to has a different set of circumstances that you've got to get around and get your bike working the best. If you go to Moto2, for instance, you got exactly the same engines, exactly the same tyres, and pretty much exactly the same chassis. Kalex on 90% of the chassis out there. You've got the Bosco Oscuro, formerly speed-ups, so on and so forth. It's not like the old days where you had the Harris chassis and the Moriwaki chassis and all the rest of it. Kalex work best across most tracks, generally. That's how it is. And yet there are teams riding Kalex bikes that can't match some of the teams' setups that are riding exactly the same material. You can't legislate against the guys that are going fast in those circumstances, surely. And again, that kind of spreads out even wider when you've got different manufacturers and different chassis as well. It's it's probably the worst job in the world trying to balance that lot up, really, isn't it? When you think about it. Isn't it?
Well,
hello.
The dog barks.
I reckon that dog could make more sense of that than me.
He agrees with you again, Keith.
Yeah.
I heard what he said.
Thank you, Joe Nichols, for sending in that question. Erin has asked, is the GP21 the best bike on the grid?
Ooh. It's heading that way, isn't it? Yeah.
Pete?
I think I'd say so, yeah. Quattraro was, of course, the early part of the race. There was a load of Ducatis around him, wasn't it? He said he was just seeing red everywhere he looked. There were the two factory bikes. There was Martin on the Pramac bike as well. And yeah, I mean, in these upcoming races, if there's going to be all these Ducatis, we heard Jack say before this weekend, look, if the team asks me to help, and I'm happy to help, I'm a team guy. If Pecco's in this title fight and I can help him in any way. And at the moment, Quattraro hasn't got anyone that can sort of do that for him on the Yamaha side, has he? So, yeah, I think I'd say overall the GP21, best bike at the moment.
Could be interesting to see what goodies are coming out the box for 2022 for all the manufacturers. But I tell you what, with Ducati stealing a little bit of a mark, they're beginning to get to where they need to be at this moment in time. And 8 bikes on the grid next year, the amount of data they are going to be dragging back through all of those bikes. There's going to be some kind of dominance maybe from Ducati next year if they've played it right in the winter. Going to be really, and that's going to annoy a lot of people.
Yeah. We're very excited for 2022, aren't we? Just as excited to see what the rest of 2021 brings us. Last one from Tanya. Could it be 3 for 3 for Pecco? God, I hope so. Smashing chap and bloody good race.
Well, he is a smashing chap. There's no doubt about that. And everybody said once he won one, that's going to be it. Once he's got through that mental bloody blockage that you have, once you know you can do it. And the way he's won both of these races has been absolute sheer quality. He's been under pressure. One from Marc Marquez, another one from Quattraro. When you see your pit board hanging over the board, you got 2.7, I think it was 2.7 second lead that he got, 2.5, 2.3, 1.9. It's like a nightmare. It's like cue the Jaws music, like all of a sudden you're trying to keep it smooth, trying to hit all your markers, trying to make, the laps are coming down. You're trying to manage that gap to perfection. You don't want to be forced into making an error. And it takes a special kind of rider that can manage that. Also, he seems to really, really have sorted out that mid-corner speed. The bit that Ducati have struggled with for so long, being able to make a bike turn, it's looking now like it's turning. The tyres at Michelin have now sort of that are general. They're working well with the Ducati, or the Ducati's working well with the Michelin. It's making a difference. It's looking good from that point of view.
It's interesting today. He was asked, where are you making the difference compared to the other Ducatis? And he thinks it's all on, as he says, the braking, the last part of braking and the entry into the corner. He said that's where he seems to have a difference and advantage compared to the other guys. And he explained he'd been looking a lot at Jorge Lorenzo's data, and that had kind of given him some ideas. And then he'd done a lot of training on the Panigale. Now, you can't use MotoGP spec tyres as such, but he said the tyres that they can use are kind of world endurance tyres, I think. He said the front tyre is actually not too different. And so he'd just been learning, and all the VR46 Academy guys are at Misano training quite often, aren't they? And he'd been just practicing this braking and the corner entry, because that was where he struggled initially. And he's turned it into one of his strengths. And, the other guys, as he says, the other guys are just not able to do what he's doing at the moment. And, Cota's got a big long straight. And if they have got the Ducati turning better, there's a lot of sort of fairly low speed corners, aren't there, at Cota for bikes at least. They're all designed for the Formula One cars. But if that Ducati's turning better, it's going to enjoy the long back straight there, and it's very stable. I remember how bumpy Cota's been. We haven't been there for a couple of years, but certainly in the past there's been an issue with bumps. But the Ducati is one of the most stable bikes over the bumps, it seems, at the moment. So it's all looking good for him. And say Quartararo is making the difference on the Yamaha, but he's alone, and it's going to be interesting to see. Can he do it all on his own, if you like, as he says, or will he be seeing red for the rest of the year?
Well, speaking of the rest of the year, your crystal ball, Pete, is working absolute wonders, because you predicted Bagnaia to win this weekend, if you remember, and neither of us did. But with that, in our very own championship, Keith and Pete, you extend your lead over me with 6 points each, and I have a measly 3. But we will get the predictions in for next week's show, because we will return with you same time next week for more MotoGP chat. You can keep up to date with all the very latest on crash.net. We will return to preview all things Circuit of the Americas, which gets going on the 1st of October. Any questions before then, send them in all the usual ways. Leave them in the comments section, or tweet, Instagram, or Facebook us. Just search Crash MotoGP. Leave us a review wherever you get your podcast as well, and we'll see you right back here next week. Bye-bye.